Okay. Do you ever wonder which editor is which, or what they do, or even what they want us to know? If so, you're in luck because today we have editor Adam Blackman with us. Adam is a former bookstore manager and nonprofit director turned freelance editor and writer of children's literature. He earned his MFA in fiction from Sarah Lawrence College and wrote for adults until the day his son came home from kindergarten, ashamed of his sparkly rainbow shoes. This showed him the need for more acceptance and inspired his first story for children. He now acquires and edits picture books and middle grade novels for several publishers, independent publishers, and works with writers on a freelance basis to shape and shine their stories. And I have worked with Adam in two of those capacities, so I can attest to his expertise. Welcome, Adam.
Well, thank you so much. It's a delight to be here. Thanks for
I am
inviting me.
so excited. I
Yeah,
know how busy you are, and
yeah.
I really appreciate you coming together to talk to folks because I know there's a lot of confusion sometimes about the word editor, right? Because there's so many different kinds of editors and they have different roles. And so I thought first off, we would let you explain a little bit of that to us and what people need to understand when they hear editor.
Well, first, I would say there's different aspects of editing. So starting off, you would have developmental editing. This is basically the first round of editing. It's the thing that where you work with a story to help figure out the big picture stuff. So is the story right? Is this the right voice? Those different kinds of things. And that is can be the first few rounds. So whether that's usually not something that you would be doing in-house with um, with a publisher. That would happen before any kind of submission opportunities, right?
Right.
And so there are certain cases where developmental editing, I don't know a great deal about it, but I believe that would be kind of part of working with IP or intellectual property. That's a little different scenario. That's a specific scenario where maybe a publisher, let's say it's like a Marvel franchise or some kind of franchise
Okay.
where they have pre-existing characters and they are going to work with writers to build a story. So it's more like work for hire than people working on their own stuff. In that case, I think an editor and an author might do some kind of developmental brainstorming prior to the early stages. But otherwise, when you're working on your own work, and this could be if you are agented or not, but you want to get it, whether it's you want to get it right and tight before you send it to your agent, whether your agent says, you know, it's an interesting concept, but I think you really need to go back to the drawing board. Why don't you go hire an editor and work on it for a while because it's interesting enough that I'd like to see it, but definitely not in its current form. Those kinds of scenarios can happen. And then for those who are not agented and just sort of like you're out there, you're working, and you want some support on the story, usually the first pass of it is this kind of developmental. So after that happens, then and let's say you get you're getting it down to okay, you know what the story is, you've got the basic structure, you've figured those kinds of things out. Then you're getting into we call line edits. Those are really the consistency, the pacing, the word choice, all of that. And so, and those, and that is something that will happen in-house, even after a manuscript has been acquired. And so, and that will also something that will happen with an agent after you've signed on with them, where they may say, I absolutely love this story. Let's see the other three or four that you have. And then they go ahead I realize that I'm speaking specifically in picture book kind of framing, but if they bring you on board, most likely that first story that they love to death, they're still going to want to work with you and edit on before submitting it. And so that's most likely going to be a line editing stage. Okay. As I was saying, all of those different kinds of things that would be looked at. And then the last step and this is usually what happens in-house with a publisher too, is the copy editing stage. This is where we're talking final spell check kind of editing. And so at a large, a major publishing house, you're going to have probably different people doing some of these different jobs. At a smaller press, like Cardinal Rule Press, where I'm primarily working, that's going to happen with me or the one editor that you're working with through the whole process. And then likewise, if you're going to look at a freelance editor, you would specify which types of services you are looking for, and kind of negotiate that out when you're figuring out what the arrangement is with a freelance editor.
That's great. That helps us, I think, because like I said, I think it's a little bit of a confusing thing for people, especially when they're first starting out, right? So
Yeah,
that's great. That's great. I appreciate it. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do specifically or who you do it for and also your freelance work and what you do.
sure. So I've been acquisitions editor at Cardinal Rule Press for the last 5 years.
Mhm.
And the very first, and so what that means is going through all of the submissions, and sometimes also connecting with folks, whether it's through events where there are specific submission
Mhm.
opportunities, or with agents, and them submitting their clients' work. And so all of these different ways of bringing in submissions is the first part of the job, right? It's kind of like if you're fishing, it's casting your line. And then I'm not going to continue. I was pausing because I'm like, I'm not going to continue the fishing metaphor. I don't have any experience fishing, and and I think it's going to break down. But the but then the next step is to take from that sort of wider group of submissions, narrowing it down to the few,
Mhm.
and then making the final decisions. And that could be based on a number of different criteria. It depends on the house, depends on what they're looking for, depends on wish lists, etc. And so my role has been to do those first two phases,
Okay.
either independently on my own or with the assistance of interns, to
Okay.
support culling through like thousands of manuscripts, and particularly getting rid of things that categorically do not fit the guidelines for that particular press. And then when it comes to the final decisions, there's a process for that, that is collaborative with the publisher, and some beta readers that the publisher works with. And so, yeah, so that is my part as far as the acquisitions go. So once we do that, then we have, gets to the point of having a contract with an author. Then I will work with the author to shine the story. Shape and shine is what I like to think. So um, sometimes that can be uh, absolutely no words need to be changed. Sometimes it's just, oh, we need a subtitle for this, because that is just something that Cardinal World Press specifically does in all of our books. But most of the time, there are some changes. There are, whether it is as big as, that ending is just not quite landing as well as we want it to. What can we do to make that happen? Or we definitely need a new title, or there's something. I wonder if this character is really necessary. Like all of those kinds of things can happen, and those sound a little bit more like in the developmental stages. And so they're edging between developmental and copy editing, or I'm sorry, and line editing. And so I do, all of those things, and then once we have gotten it down to the final text, what seems like the final text can sometimes change just a little bit once the art comes through.
Mhm.
But once we have all those final things, we're also kind of doing scan the we're doing the copy editing part of things, to make sure that there are no grammatical errors, or typographical errors. So I kind of do all of that, and then my work within the press has also included some work with community building within the press, because we're a small press and we have a wonderful group of authors who, support each other and create community and share resources, because we are all in the business together of getting books to children. And that means also supporting each other as authors and creators. So um, that all of that
It,
stuff.
I can attest to
Yeah.
that. It is a wonderful, wonderful group of folks, both on the staff side and the author side. Very supportive folks. It's really a joy to work with. And some of that you were talking about with the acquisitions portion, I had a few people submit some questions, and a couple
Okay.
of those apply to your acquisitions part. So I'm going to go ahead and tell you what a couple of people asked. One thing was about R&Rs, or
Mhm.
revise and resubmit, which you can explain that too, because maybe some folks don't understand, but whether or not you ever do those, and if so, what do you look for, and how broad are those, as far as would you accept a story that was way off in structure, but you knew it had promise? So all of that R&R stuff, what do you do as far as R&R goes?
Right. Well, for one thing, I would say to frame that
Mhm.
is only send out your absolute best work, right? Make sure, don't, if you have a concern or a question about the structure, do not submit it. Wait until you've gotten lots of feedback. Wait until you've let it sit and returned to it. All of these different methods that people use to feel confident that they really express themselves exactly as they want to in a story. So that would be the first thing I would say. As far as R&Rs, so revise in general with acquisitions, when you submit something and an editor says, passes on it, then that means that they're passing on the project. That means that if you go back eventually at some point and revise it, it's not really considered good form to try to resubmit that project again. You could submit other projects, but that's so a revise and resubmit is, I think of it as an invitation. It is an exclusive invitation that says this particular project has something really special about it. It has merit enough that I would look at it again if you were to revise. And so what an editor is doing is taking time out to think about that story, to cultivate the relationship with the author with that invitation. And that includes notes. So I have used revise and resubmit successfully and unsuccessfully, and in a number of different ways. And when I say successfully, I'm thinking Christmas Cake in December, which went on to become It'll Be Irene. So,
Oh,
um, so that was a wonderful. The story was basically there, and the voice jumped off the page. The humor was a delight. The energy of the prose was just unmistakable, and I really wanted to see if the author could take a few notes and kind of just bring it up to kind of crisp it up a bit. Um, and he did. And that's when we brought it on board. And then we did continue editing after that. But
mhm.
and in fact, it got its new title. It got a new ending. We lost a character. All
Okay.
in the edit, all of that in the editing process together. And it tightened things. So that was a really wonderful process and really and very successful. Um, there was another time when I gave a revise and resubmit, and the person did a great job. And we actually even made an offer, and they ended up declining that offer because they wanted to go elsewhere. Now, here's the thing. So revise and resubmits, um, in general, are looked at as going from a simultaneous submission to an exclusive submission. So to explain the difference, when you are submitting your workplaces, if you submit it to more than one place at the same time, the same piece, then it is a simultaneous submission. An exclusive submission, which is mostly considered a relic of the past from back when we used to put things in manila envelopes and to put them in the mail. But there are places that require exclusive submissions on the first go around. That just means only submit it to me and nowhere else until you hear back from me. Okay. Or the term that they say is up. Like if you haven't heard back in 12 weeks, then it's a no, that kind of thing. So you set a little calendar reminder for yourself and that. Now with an R&R, for the most part, if an editor is taking time out to give you notes and you decide to accept them and you do that, you're essentially working with that editor. And that's their time and labor that they put into making those notes. So the courtesy and the understanding is that would be considered exclusive until they have had a chance to look at that version of it.
Right.
Once they have looked at that version of it, and either passed or made an offer, then you can take that and go and submit elsewhere. So that would be, I hope that explains
Yes,
and
perfect.
demystifies R&Rs a bit.
And I love the real examples, so that really helps a lot. That's great. Let me see. We covered the kinds of editors and what they do. Will you talk a little bit about queries and how important different aspects of them are and why they're important to you? And I know this is kind of an individualized thing. Different editors
Mhm.
like different kinds of
Yep.
queries or different details, but tell us about your experience and what you like to see.
So I think with queries, less is more.
Okay.
Okay. And I think that a lot of people feel like they maybe need to present themselves in a certain way to inflate their status in the industry or to
Mhm.
explain why they are um, almost to not explain, but to almost like to justify the fact that they dared to write. You don't. You have every right to write, whatever story it is of your heart, whether or not you have ever been to school for writing, whether or not you are in a critique group, whether or not you are a member of SCBWI or 12 by 12 or any of the other forums, you have a right to write what you're writing. And so you don't need to like create credentials that don't exist. Okay. However, I think that the boilerplate query letter that works pretty nicely is just paragraph 1, introduction. Why are you submitting to this person? It does not have to be much. It can just be, I saw your manuscript wish list. I attended your webinar. I think you would be a good fit because you represent people whose work I love. And I think my work is similar or like, whatever it is. And when I say represent, I guess that's a query. I think of, for some reason, the word query to me specifically means to agents.
Right.
Submission applies to publishers and editors. But so actually that is a good note because they are two different things and they're
Yes.
very similar. But there are certain things that when you're submitting to an editor are going to be slightly different than the query.
Mhm.
Um, and we'll get to that. So, but the first part is basically, so if you were submitting to an editor, you obviously wouldn't say, "Oh, I have a story exactly like this other one you published," because that's
Yeah.
not going to work. So, but like you publish realistic fiction, here is my realistic fiction picture book. Okay, great. You're demonstrating that you have done the research, and that's a good. So, but a very quick sentence doing that, and then jump right into, and this is what I'm submitting. Picture book at 500 words uh, about um, about a boy who jumps out of a book and um, I don't know becomes a real boy, whatever it is. And and then you would do your very short um, synopsis, although synopsis is typically used for a little bit longer work, like a middle grade or something like that. But you could call it like the sort of plot summary or synopsis. However, I've seen it called both. But basically, a small plot summary paragraph that can include your comp titles. It's good to have two comp titles. Some people require it, some people don't. A lot of times that's a specific part of query tracker. Um,
Right.
right? You pull away thing. Um, so the third paragraph then would be your bio. And so again, don't need to create credentials, it, but you still want to have a bio paragraph. So, I've been writing since I was 4. If you some people really like to know what inspired a certain
Mhm.
story. I wrote this book about a boy jumping out of books because I was a high jumper. I don't know.
Right, right. Something
And
personal.
a bookworm. And I thought, what if I put these two together? So that kind of thing. And so again, less is more with that. One line, maybe two max. And then if there are any writing credentials, um, you know, it some people care a lot about whether you were an honorable mention for X, Y, or Z award. Um, for me personally, it's just about helping me understand where you are, like member of SCBWI, or if like whether you've been, um, won any contests or things like that.
Mhm.
Just show that you're participating, and that's the main thing that's demonstrating. Um, Again, not required, but helps us contextualize where you are within your bio. Otherwise, a lot of extra biographical details. I personally don't really need to know, exactly how, your family structure, unless it was particularly relevant to the subject of the story, those kinds of things. Um, and so really just think of it as if you were submitting a a cover letter for a job, which is really what it is. And so the last paragraph after the bio paragraph is usually a simple one. Um, you would say, if this would be your debut picture book, it's usually people usually like to see that. Sorry, obviously in your bio, if you have publications, you would include those. But in that last paragraph, it's usually something very simple, like, this would be my debut picture book. Um, uh, you know, and then usually people like to see, like, per your guidelines, attach this, or I have copied and pasted it, or whatever the guidelines are. Again, you're just showing that you have read and are following the procedures.
Yeah,
Uh,
it amazes me when I hear how often I hear editors or even agents say, they are sending me these things that number one we don't even publish, or that I don't represent if it's an agent, and how often people, just blanket send things out and don't do that research, and how important it really is.
yeah, or you get a letter with the wrong name on it.
Oh yeah, right.
And
Yeah,
and so I mean, and that's like, yeah, we get that people are doing that these days and that mistakes happen. So it doesn't mean like for some people, I'm sure it's an automatic delete. It's not for me, but it doesn't, but it biases you against something because you're like, oh, so
sure.
you didn't take the time to personalize this to your audience. And
Yeah,
so it just doesn't feel good if someone was to
right.
like call you the wrong name right off
Yeah.
the bat,
Copy and paste.
So
Got it.
yeah.
Whatever. That's great.
So
This has been wonderful. I wish we could go on. Maybe we'll have you back again and
yeah,
do some
sure.
more questions, because there's a lot of stuff out there. One thing that I do want to cover, two things. First, and I know this is really hard to answer, but someone asked, what really makes a manuscript pop for you? And that's a big question. Then the
Yeah.
last thing I want you to tell me is maybe the most exciting moment you've had in publishing or a really exciting moment and what's made it really special for you. So, two more things.
So after those two things, I want to add on because I realized I didn't answer the same question about the
Okay.
freelance editorial work
Okay.
and what that entails. So what makes a manuscript pop can be a number of different things.
Hmm.
And I can say, um, okay, I've been doing this presentation recently for SCBWI that includes some of these things. And
Awesome.
so I would say I've been calling it a few different extra elements that like tip people over from being like in the top 10 to being one of the 2 to 4 that we might publish during that year, right?
Nice.
And so one of those things is hooks. So the hook can be plot element, it can be the voice, it can be any of a number of things. But if you have multiple stories, and a lot of times we do get multiple stories that are around the same subject matter.
Okay.
And the example I often use is that in 2020, we get a lot of baking with grandpa stories. And so, and then when what the bread says that we published that year,
Mhm.
um, has two wonderful extra hooks that has a combination of family history that is mixed in with world history. And so, and that was that was a unique element that like literally braided together the story because they're making hollow through the story. And so um, that's an example. But the other example I like to call pluck, which is sort of basically a kid friendliness and exuberance in the tone. We deal with sometimes heavy subjects, but told with levity and mirth. And Three Pockets Full, I often think of as a great example of that one. Um, so that's a thing that can make a manuscript pop. The um, The other factors that go into those final decisions are not specific to the manuscript, so I'll just stick with those two um, that are really kind of about the writing. Okay.
I love that
Uh,
those were so specific. That really helps to know what you're trying to explain as far as
right.
pop goes. Because we hear general things like voice, and it's hard to know what that really
Yeah.
means to different people. And so I love those specific
Yeah.
examples.
Yeah, absolutely. And voice is it's absolutely true. And it can also be absolutely maddening to hear as a writer because you're like, what do you mean by voice? There are really specific things that are meant because it's the exact word choice that you use. It's not just first
Yeah,
person, third person, or this character's, thoughts in italics versus not in italics. It's like also the difference between the thought versus the narrator.
yeah.
It's how and when you use repetition. All of these things contribute to voice. Um, so, um, so sorry, you had the next question.
Well, go ahead with what you said during the freelance editing that you wanted to add.
Oh, oh yes, because you asked about like what these different types of work were like. So
Right.
with freelance editing, it's the different stages that I was mentioning earlier. It's really just individual working with individual writers to see where they're at.
Mhm.
There's also a whole ideation aspect of things and a brainstorming aspect of things, which honestly I love so much. I love
Yeah.
getting on a Zoom like this with authors and helping them work through a problem with story or say, what about this? What about that? And like saying, and then having the moment when they're like, oh, no, they're like, no, no, that's not what I mean. That's not what I mean. Oh, wait, yes, that's kind of like where we're at. And
I love that too.
it's a
Yes.
lot of fun. And so I consider that can be actually at any part of the process because it could be a part of a developmental edit that
Hmm.
includes, bigger picture stuff, or it could be like, wait, we've just found the exact right word for that moment, which is much more of a line edit moment. And so the so for that, really, I work with everything from picture books up through middle grade. I
Hmm.
have yet to do YA, although I'm sure I'll be broadening out to include YA at some point soon. Um, And, with my background in adult fiction and then the
Right.
work I've done up to middle grade, it's kind of the middle ground there. So yeah, I feel pretty solid about that. Um, and so yeah, I've been working in all of those different phases, from the developmental to the, kind of narrowing it down to getting it either submission ready or self-publishing ready. A lot of folks who are looking uh, for freelance editorial support are looking to be author publishers, as I have learned the term is. And so that, because it really is, when you're doing that self-publishing, you are acting as the publisher. So there's a lot of effort and coordination, um, as well as expense that you're putting into it.
Yeah.
And so um,
I
that's
bet sometimes it feels like you're a doctor seeing someone in the emergency room and then you never see them again and you never know what they're thinking unless that book gets published, right? So, you might
yeah,
you might give do an editing session for someone at the developmental stage, and then you just have to wait and see, does that book,
yeah.
come out?
Right, exactly. And it's I'm fairly new at doing this. I've only been doing this during this past year. So I'm hoping that there will be people who will continue to work with me for future books,
Right.
and that we'll be able to continue the relationship.
Yep, me.
Excellent.
Great. All right, give us one last thought about the whole
Well,
publishing process, being an editor, what's been a highlight for you?
well, I think I'm working with writers
Yeah.
is what it's all about to me. I mean, obviously, the end game of getting books into kids' hands and having them experience them is a total joy. So anytime I'm at an event, or when I was doing a presentation for my son's class, or went with Lee Wind, the author of Like That Eleanor, up to the Eleanor Roosevelt Center and had a room full of kids, and he was reading
Oh,
to them along with Eleanor Roosevelt's great granddaughter. It was just that was a fantastic day, and
so
we're
cool.
connecting right with those kids, which is great. That's an outlier. And
Yeah.
so but the work of editing, of really getting to like connect with authors, well, the irony of the moment is that on Zoom here with you, I was about to say my favorite part of the process before the Zoom cut me off is the Zoom call. It is the phone call where we get to communicate, because I can sit in a vacuum and I can make line item notes, and I can put together an edit letter, and I can go back and forth and do that and try to make sure that I'm saying exactly what I want to say about it. But what's really important and the best part is when, after the author has gotten to receive that, and then we get to talk about it, and sometimes they'll say, wait, you didn't like that part, but I meant this. And I'm like, oh, okay, I see it. I actually misread. Or actually, I hear what you're saying your intention was, but it wasn't quite coming across. Maybe if you tweak this just a little bit, then it'll pop out. Like, all of those kinds of things are really my favorite part.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
And again, I might have you back again to talk about some more of these editor aspects and questions that we get. But thank you so
Okay.
much. I really appreciate you being here.
Absolutely. My
Uh,
pleasure. Thanks
Take
so much.
care. Bye bye.
Bye bye.